في الجلسة الثالثة سنسلط الضوء على الاتجاهات الجديدة في تكنولوجيا التعليم والابتكار، مع التركيز على الدروس المستفادة من الجائحة، وكيف أثر تطور التكنولوجيا على تعلم الطلبة والتنمية المهنية للمعلمين. يدير هذه الجلسة زميلنا السيد عبدالمجيد شملاوي، المدير التنفيذي للتطوير الاستراتيجي في أكاديمية الملكة رانيا تدريب المعلمين.
Thank you, Mohammed. A kind reminder that you will receive a certificate of attendance after the forum concludes. You do not need to fill any forms to receive the certificate. And instant interpretation is available to Arabic, English, and French. Innovation and technology have been affecting student learning, teacher development, and the overall education ecosystem. In the coming session, we will address some of the new trends in technology and innovation, highlighting lessons learned during the pandemic. Moderating this session is my colleague, Mr. Abdelmajeed Shamlawi, QRTA's Executive Director of Strategic Development. Please, Abed.
Thank you, Nabila. Thank you, Mohammed. كل الشكر لكم نبيلة ومحمد. يعطيكم العافية. Switching to English, this session actually will be running in English. So just a kind note to our attendees to switch your interpretation to Arabic if you wish. بس بخبركم إن شاء الله هذه السيشن هذه الجلسة رح تكون باللغة العربية. إذا بتحبوا اضغطوا على زر الكرة الأرضية اللي هو الانتربريتيشن واختاروا لغة عربية عشان تقدروا تسمعوها باللغة العربية. Turning to English, and I would love to welcome actually my colleagues on this panel, Nafez, Mounira, and Vanina. This will be a great session, hopefully. Introducing the panelists, Nafez is the executive chairman of EdTech. EdTech is a partner organization focusing on publishing online courses and MOOCs, massive open online courses to the Arab region. Welcome, Nafez, on board.
Thank you, Abid. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Mounira is the founder and managing and currently managing actually A'nab. A'nab is a partner organization also focusing on professional teacher development in the region and has been focusing on online courses for the past couple of years. Welcome, Dr. Mounira, on board.
Thank you, Abdelmajeed. It's a pleasure to be here always.
And also welcoming also Dr. Vanina. Dr. Vanina is the education practice lead at EY Parthenon in the region. Welcome, Dr. Vanina, on board.
Great pleasure being here.
So everyone has been, over the past couple of days, today and yesterday, everyone has been talking about how technology has shifted or has affected the education, delivery, and learning of students over the past couple of years. And the effect has been quite interesting to actually study and analyze and look at. And we've all been living a transformation. Suddenly, back in, at least in Jordan, back in March 2020, everything should and will happen online. So that's basically the nature of things over the past couple of years. If I can turn to Nafez to just from your observation and looking from your observation as EdTech and Nafez as well, how innovation and technology have been affecting students' learning over the past couple of years. Over to you, Nafez.
Thank you, Abed. It's a pleasure to be here with Dr. Mounira and Dr. Vanina, and it's really a pleasure to always be in the company of QRTA and the great communities you're able to convene. I think this is a very maybe broad-based question. I'll try to answer part of it, but definitely leave more for my fellow panelists. Perhaps the most pressing change on sort of people's minds is the last maybe 18 to 24 months. From our perspective at EdTech, I'd say most of our experience has been with adult learners. And we can say that, I mean, for better or worse, and I think it's a double-edged sword, there's been a huge increase in adoption in online learning across the past 24 months. At EDRAK, we started March 2020 with a little over 2.5 million learners. Today, we are well over 5 million learners across the MENA region, and we're seeing increase in engagement rates, and we're seeing learners from every single Arab country. You know, I can't tell you, this affected one country more than the other. But of course, at the same time, we do need to keep some issues around sort of equity and access, who's able to access content more online. Before the pandemic, we had more female learners on the platform than male learners. Now it's probably closer to 50-50 or maybe even 51% male. That maybe doesn't necessarily indicate a lack of access, but it is interesting to see that, because historically, EDRAK has had sort of more female learners across the MENA region. I mean, female learners continue to complete at higher rates. So that's the last part is maybe a bit higher to judge at this point. I think the line I will sort of maybe over-index on is this was an emergency response. I mean, I don't think we did this in the right, careful, calculated manner. But before EDRAK, before the pandemic, people would ask us at EDRAK, why are you doing online learning? Do people want to learn online? Are people in the MENA region ready to learn online? I think that's no longer a question globally. I think in terms of adoption, there's been a massive rise in adoption. There's been a huge understanding of the importance of online learning as a solution, maybe not the solution, but as part of the arsenal that we have as educators and people interested in education reform to push the momentum forward. Again, whether that's maybe brought forward some demand and we'll see a drop in future years is yet to be seen. But I think in terms of an attitudinal shift, there's been a massive adoption of online learning. I think the question now people are asking is, which online solutions are right for me? Should I develop online learning in-house? Should I do it with a provider? And I think people are starting to ask also more important question. What does it mean to learn online? How much technology do I need? And like we've always maintained that good technology is one that sort of blends in the background. Technology is really not the focal point here. The focal point here is really sort of the instructional design, the pedagogy you're using. And I think COVID has forced us to ask some of these questions. Why are we here? Why are we doing? What are the jobs to be done by the different, online learning platforms that are moving online? Yeah, I could obviously talk a lot more about this, but I'll end it here.
Thank you, Nafez. Thank you. Let me actually take the part about the effect on teachers, honestly, and turn to Mounira. Dr. Mounira, how have you seen the shift of or the effect on teachers' development over the past couple of years with the shift online? Maybe you can address this point from your experience, not only in Saudi, but UAE and the region, as well as A'nab and the online development.
Thank you, Abdelmajeed. Definitely to add on to what Nafez was saying, and we've seen that in the teacher development area. When we first started A'nab, learning online and professional development online was not a very common, I would say, strategy for teachers at the time. We understood professional development as something that is done face-to-face, and there is very big value in what we do face-to-face and a lot of on-the-job learning. Today, we are really talking about designing effective professional development programs that are engaging, that ensure a transfer of knowledge, that have a component of technology within them. Sometimes the technology is fully 100%, sometimes it's 50%, but the designing of learning is at the heart of the transformation after COVID. Everybody today is talking about engaging learning online, effective learning online. It's not so much about adoption. Have they adopted technology? Yes, they have. Are they online? There were 1 billion students online, and now a huge number of teachers online. We are also expecting 2 billion more students by 2050. I mean, how am I going to cater to 2 billion more students coming into the education sector by 2050? So it's not going to be about adoption. I think education and technology are becoming very symbiotic in how they are integrating. It's going to be more about how are we going to ensure that the learner is engaged, that the professional development knowledge is being transferred to the person learning online.
Thank you. Amazing note, actually, that the question is no longer about adoption. That's a given, of course, almost basically, and the focus is more about usage, strategies, assessments, and how do we take it further into the next level. Let me turn actually to Dr. Vanina and to try and address the effect on the education systems from your perspective and regional exposure. How do you see the effect on education systems? Maybe you can highlight this. Actually.
Yes, I'm actually glad to come after Nafez and Mounira, because I think now it's the missing bit is really about the ecosystem overall, and building on exactly what they are saying. Now it's given that there has been this huge increase in adoption, right? We all know that that's a fact. The real point to me actually is to look at the pandemic, well, because I'm a very optimistic person, as really an opportunity now to understand how to best use this adverse effect of the COVID-19 as a catalyst for change. Catalyst for change to prepare us for a better educational system. What does it mean? This is related to what we were discussing before, because to me, the key word for a better educational system in the future is balance. Balance in all the components that we have been already mentioning so far. So the pandemic to me at the ecosystem worldwide, but definitely also in the Middle East, has highlighted is huge for a better balance in all the different, let's say, ingredients of the traditional curriculum, but also operating model construct of the education system. And so it's important that when now it comes to the opportunity to redesign the educational experience, the curriculum, the pedagogy, et cetera, it's important to identify now what's the right balance between all the key ingredients, which means what's the right balance between the use of digital technologies for learning, for teaching, along with the traditional ones. Because they're not going to disappear completely. Hopefully not, because there was some good in those as well, right? And again, what's the right balance between providing students with a global perspective that it's needed for sure, along with the more deeper knowledge on the specific context of each country, of belonging for each student. A balance between the needed collaborative skills along with some more individual skills. A balance between the intellectual knowledge that we need to provide in the education system. It's our role, right? Together with some more practical knowledge, together with the development of social, emotional skills that is so important also to instill in the curriculum. And when it comes to online learning, e-learning, things get a bit complicated. And again, a right balance between curricular versus extracurricular activities. So now, for the sake of time, I'm just, mentioning the most important ones without exploring them too much. But the lesson is that when it comes to redesigning now all the ingredients of the educational system. There are many challenges ahead, yes, but most importantly, an amazing opportunity to use this as exceptional time to improve and possibly advance and ideally transform the education system through a better balance among all these ingredients. So I really wanted to put more emphasis on this, because to me it's a very important concept, because I don't foresee a future where it will be completely tech-driven, the educational experience. And honestly, I'm not wishing for that. So let's welcome all the benefits from technology, all the lessons learned from the pandemic, but let's also preserve the human being element and aspect that needs to go together with that, and has been the key characteristic of the traditional methods.
Thank you, and thank you for highlighting actually that online is hopefully it's a transformational step I mean, again, if I want to go back in time 2 years ago when the switch to online happened, I think the focus wasn't really about transformation at the beginning, was really more about continuing learning. And that was the interest of teachers and schools and education systems, is how to switch to use online mechanisms and online channels to continue learning. But as you're saying, there has been a number of benefits of that. Of course, there has been experiences, and there has been positives and negatives about using online. And maybe actually we can take this as our focus for the next maybe a few minutes. So what are, Nafez, can you maybe highlight some of the trends that you saw? I mean, good, bad, some of the trends that we can build on, probably.
Sure. I mean, I think focusing at least on the learner segment we work the most with, the most promising trend I've seen is a realization from, I'd say, HR and L&D departments that learning can happen all the time and anywhere. I think, and that's really sort of pushed this idea, you know, just in time, on demand learning. And again, it's just not just really sort of the lot that's benefited from this, of course, the Coursera's, Udacity's, LinkedIn Learnings, and others of the world, you know, have really seen, you know, a push in that area that's really benefited them. The other trend that I think, Abed, you and I talked about a bit is this whole idea of trust. Trust became sort of no longer optional, especially when it came to sort of learning. I think initially we were trying to measure things like seat time and other aspects that we can control in the physical environment. Obviously, I mean, there will be substitutes, and there are substitutes that you can sort of control and get proxies for in the digital space. But I think at least in the beginning, it forced us to sort of trust learners more, which brings me to sort of, I think, my last point, which is better and perhaps more sophisticated sort of measurements of learning in terms of realizing that very instructionist and didactic pedagogy that's primarily measuring memorization isn't very helpful. I think we've seen a lot of instructors, a lot of institutions, a lot of move towards more sort of open book assessment and realizing that it's not as helpful or relevant to measure, you know, retention of fact. It's more sort of the application of facts, and that's led to more maybe sort of problem-based or sort of inquiry-led instruction. I'd say that those are maybe the top 3 trends we've seen, and then I'm sure there are sort of many more I've missed that my colleagues on the panel will highlight.
Mounira, maybe because of your interaction with teachers in the region and the campaigns that you've actually ran for PD during this period, what do you see the trends, which maybe you can highlight some, and the transformation that you saw as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're seeing that more and more teachers are asking about, schools are asking about, and scholars, to be honest, in the sector, is how to break down learning into its smallest components so we can deliver this learning effectively. And I totally agree, by the way, with Dr. Vanina that learning shouldn't be completely online. But today, after the pandemic, we are talking more about what is learning, because we suddenly, you know, shifted where learning happens. We're suddenly online, but what is learning? So you see a lot of teachers, schools asking, okay, and even scholars, like I said, so break it down into its smallest components. And I've read a lot about this post-pandemic. Myself, I was learning about this. So, you know, there is something about the learning molecule, it being, for example, having learning objectives, instructional resources, and then assessment, and then how you can play around with changing the learning objective, changing the assessment method, changing the instructional resource. Today it's a teacher, tomorrow it's a platform, after tomorrow it's a robot, after that it's some form of pushed content at you, whether small content or big content, courses or credentials, whatever it is, but really breaking down what it means. The other trend we're seeing is, how do you create a community of learning? And this is something we are also learning at ANAB. How do you not make learning very solitary? Because we suddenly moved online and because we are suddenly going back to school. We're not yet fully back to school in Saudi Arabia, at least. So how do we create that sense of community and that sense of engagement? Some trends we're seeing is, okay, let's move to cohort-based learning. Let's put them in cohorts. Others are saying, no, we'll use adaptive learning to ensure that the learner is engaged with the platform. So there is no right answer, to be honest, and I don't even know what the answer is. I really look forward to seeing what innovation brings. But the fact that we are discussing learning design, this is what I find very exciting. I mean, today, Abdelmajeed, 2 years ago, I would never put for example, an HR request for a Zoom room manager. Today, it's actually a part-time job. You know, we wouldn't have talked about that a year and a half ago. Yeah, so the workforce is changing and we need to learn with it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mounira. I think you've just highlighted the point of this important session that we were talking about. What was meant just as a door opener into technology and learning has actually opened the door completely for innovation and thinking outside the box. Simply, we're redesigning how learning is happening. And by saying we, everyone is actually redesigning how learning is happening. And the students are actually at the center of it. So actually students are redesigning their learning at the moment, okay? Simply online is different and they have the freedom of doing this and practicing it. And maybe this is a good introduction to Dr. Vanina and how she's thinking or what are some of the lessons learned that we see. Maybe you can highlight some of this.
Do we have a couple of days to discuss all of this? Because there's so much to say, but I think I can summarize it quite easily by saying that what I'm seeing is that there is a huge transformation that is impacting every single aspect of the educational system at every levels of the educational system, from nursery to primary school to secondary schools to university in each component. However, what I want to say today, I'm playing, I guess, the moderator role. Because I think that what I'm really seeing a lot is that the pandemic has kind of accelerated many of the things that were already happening, like putting emphasis on the need to really act on certain things. So for example, when it comes to the development of the curriculum model, the main components, as we all know, is content, is pedagogy, is assessment. Each of these three elements has been hugely disrupted by the pandemic. Why? Well, content-wise, this has been is being used as the opportunity to really redefine the curriculum to include the so-called future-looking skills, to really realign the curriculum to what is really needed today from the job market. And by the way, let's not forget that companies' needs have always also changed because of the pandemic, because they also need different kind of skills from the people that they hire. So definitely there is this trend in providing more future-looking skills. But also together with this, something that has been extremely accelerated by the pandemic is the trend towards a more personalized and flexible modes of learning. And this is something that you, Nafez and Mounira, were also mentioning somehow. So one of the positive aspects of technology and tech-driven learning is that you can kind of choose, that what you want to do at what time and where you want to do it in quite a flexible way. And there is a beautiful example of this from the Luminous school that has this mosaic curriculum, they call it, which develop the curriculum as a matrix rather than the usual linear sequential direction. on which students can really focus on which competence they want to develop further, and to which sector that competence is particularly targeted to, etc., etc. So definitely a more flexible experience by students when it comes to content. When it comes to the pedagogy, as already mentioned a bit earlier, there has been, I guess the pandemic has accelerated the need for a more experiential and observational learning, more into preserving this aspect, because, and I would really love to hear more from Nafez and Mounira on this aspect, but I really don't know how we can really preserve this aspect of pedagogy when it comes to e-learning, because socialization and the experience for students, like using labs or music theaters or, drama box, it's a very important component of the personal development along with the professional one. And I don't know how good we are, how far we are right now in terms of these elements when it comes to e-learning. And last but not least, the assessment is also being dramatically transformed. Why? Because of course, the assessment has to be aligned with the content development, with the pedagogy that you use. So when it comes to the assessment, I think this is being used as an opportunity to develop more and more application-oriented kind of assessment, more personalized, but most importantly, when it comes to online learning, more systematic, I would say, and timely assessment, because you know better than me that when it comes to remote learning, it's super important, to provide students with this opportunity of constant, continuous feedback over time, to not lose them completely, especially when it comes to the young ones. So much more to say, but I'll keep it to that, at least the main three components of the curriculum model.
Thank you. I think you've touched on very important points, and the importance of actually the resources and teams around all of this to deliver on this. So teachers are at the heart of it, for example, and equipping them with the skills and tools to actually do that. And we at QRTA, we've been doing a lot of programs actually for teachers on that. My question is, since we only have like 5 minutes left, actually, what's next? What's coming? Of course, if we can predict what's ahead of us and the transformation we're going through. Turn to Nafez actually on that.
I think one of the clear lessons from the pandemic, Brexit, and the election of Donald Trump is probably that we should not try to predict what's next. I think we've clearly established as a civilization, as a species, that hindsight might be 20/20, but foresight is really just conjecture. I think optimistically, to touch on maybe sort of one of Dr. Mounira's points, I am hoping that this push to online will lead to more discussions and debate about how we learn and how we can learn best. I think one thing the pandemic has certainly done is exposed a lot of people who were taking learning and education for granted to exactly how their kids learn. I mean, I think some people, seeing what happened, came home and realized, like, is this what I pay for? I think part of it is going to be helpful, part of it is going to be less helpful. We certainly only want people that know what they're doing getting more involved with education, but it's always good to have more and more people ask questions, even if they're not starting with the right questions. I mean, so I think that is something I'm predicting more of. I think we're going to see more and more funding going to EdTech, into education. I think that's maybe something Dr. Mounira can also touch about. She raised her raised an important round at the beginning of the pandemic. I think that's certainly the case in the MENA region. When I first started covering and working in EdTech in 2012, 2013, people would ask me why I'm doing it. There's no point of EdTech, online learning, nobody, you don't make money. And Abdu, you and I talked about this from your days at Intaj, that people just didn't see the potential. I think that's clearly changed. I'm strongly of the opinion that it's not just a matter of money. I don't think, just because we've added more money, we're going to solve the right problems. I think that there's a very good quote that I recently heard there are no right answers to the wrong questions. So just adding more money is not the case, but certainly I would sort of predict more and more funding to EdTech. And I guess the last point I would end on is this whole idea of sort of remote work. I think for mostly everybody, remote work was the exception. I think more and more, I don't think it'll replace the office, but I think it'll be part of everybody's sort of day-to-day, and that changes part of the job to be done by education. Certainly in the K-12 space, I think the pandemic made us realize we don't only send our children to school because we want them to learn, we send them to school because we have jobs, we have other things, and there's sort of a pastoral care element, and that will change with working from home and sort of what it means.
Thank you, Nafez. Maybe I can shift to Dr. Mounira. Next, what do you see happening?
Wallahi, for what next, we need to address what now to address what's next. I agree with Nafez on that. We have a couple of critical issues we need to address post-pandemic. Learning gaps, equity issues that have affected a lot of children around the world. So that really needs to be addressed immediately and effectively. We need to address some policy learnings that we've had from the pandemics about how to quality assure online learning, how to make it accessible, how to allow innovation in online learning. If we are going to pump money into education technology, we need to have the enabling policy to allow this technology to really innovate and to grow. And this is something that, I see a lot of countries starting to work on now. Post-pandemic, already in Saudi Arabia, we have now the National E-Learning Center that is working on licensing and quality assuring online learning. So there's a lot of policy work and collaboration and partnership that countries need to work on if we want to address what's next.
Thank you. And maybe we still have 1 minute, maybe Dr. Vanina, what do you think? Where are we heading?
Well, they almost convinced me that it's better not to predict, but I guess one thing that I really would like to share with you, maybe as a closing note, it's more of a provocation, maybe something that a concept that has been inspired by Elon Musk quite recently. That is about the gamification of education. So I don't know what's coming next, but maybe the direction we are heading is to bring education somehow as close as possible, in a way, to a video game, a good video game, let's say. Where, what do we mean is that you never need to tell your kids to play video games, right? They would play video games all over on autopilot all day. Meaning that if we are able to use this as an opportunity to make education more interactive, more engaging, then it's our chance to make education maybe even more compelling. So not like to the extreme level, as Elon Musk would say, we might end up disconnecting the great system from the subject themselves, as to allow every student to progress at their fastest pace they can, based on their interests, etc., etc. Now, maybe this is a too extreme level, but what I see is that there could be definitely a vision where we can create, we can look at education as less of an assembly line, where everyone goes to English, math, English, science from grade 5 to 7 to 8 to 12 in a strict sequence, to possibly allow more for the individual progress and pace as to enhance each single individual and natural talent to flourish.
Thank you. Actually, I think we're running late in by 1 or 2 minutes, but just maybe leaving our audience with one note that we've seen over the past couple of years. While the focus shifted to content, but suddenly actually content is no longer the issue. Content is actually available, and suddenly we're all talking about skills. How do we build skills of learners? How do we interact? How do we worry about or look at the psychological effect on students and kids? So this is a great item to look at. And the next period, maybe that's where we should be heading. That's also a question. I hope this session was an eye-opener for our audience and attendees. I would like to thank actually my colleagues and panelists. Thank you, Nafez. Thank you, Dr. Mounira, and thank you, Vanina. This has been a great discussion. Maybe actually we'll have another one separately together just to continue the fruitful and great conversation. Thank you very much.